a lengthy presentation, and we're going to get through it. We have all of the administrators online that have participated in its creation. So let's get started right away, and let's move to the next slide. I don't have access to that, Fred, so you'll just have to, I guess, move to the slides as we go along. And if you could go full screen, because I don't see everything on the bottom. But before we begin, it will be recorded, and there is a question and answer area where you could submit questions. We do have questions that were already provided to us when we did the survey, and those are already posted online, and you probably received a link to that as well. The purpose of this meeting is to review the plan that we had to submit to the State Education Department in accordance with their regulations and the Department of Health guidelines that were provided to us. There will be 3 meetings altogether. The first tonight, the next one will be on Tuesday, August 18th, and the third one will be on, I believe, Thursday, August 20th at 1 p.m. That 1 p.m. meeting will be for those individuals who may work a late shift or who may have access it only during the day. So we do want to thank the parents and the community at this point for working with us. The plan was created with a team of teachers, administrators, and parents, and it was subject to several different agencies, including the Governor's Office, the Department of Health, and the Department of Education. So that's basically how we had to develop this. Next. Next slide. So the guiding principles were probably one of our first things that we had to really talk about. And the first and foremost priority is the health and safety of the students and the staff that have to teach them, as well as the staff that come into our buildings on a regular basis, such as the secretarial staff, the custodial staff, food service workers, transportation workers, etc. That keeping them safe and keeping them healthy is our first and top priority. We also needed to look at what can we do to provide the best learning experiences for all the students within our school district, including students with special needs, students that go out to career and technical education programs, students that certainly come into our buildings on a regular basis. So we wanted to provide a learning experience that captures both remote learning and in-school live learning to the best that we can offer. We did take into consideration certainly the social, emotional wellness of the staff and the students, and we do have in place support staff for those needs should they arise. So we know social, emotional wellness is important for students to be successful, not only in school, but also for later in life. We did get a lot of guidance from the Center for Disease Control and the New York State Department of Health. Most of the safety and health guidelines were provided by those agencies to New York State and to all of the school districts within New York State. The collaboration and communication and coordination with all of our stakeholders will ultimately determine the success of our district in the reopening of school in the 2021 school year. Next. So it's very important that some of the things that went into our plan really are regulatory and almost law in some regards. For example, mandatory face coverings are required in public. Our school is no exception. So we will be providing those requirements of face coverings in our buildings when we reopen schools. We are committed to following the guidelines and really trying to stress the importance of following social distancing and the mask wearing at all school functions. So We hope that the parents and community will take that into consideration and understand that we do need to follow those guidelines, and really will adopt some of the changes that will take place over the next few weeks or few months. We'll adopt and instigate and put into place any of the measures that we deem necessary to ensure that wellness of our staff and students. We get data on a regular basis. We'll adapt to that changing data as needed. And most importantly, I think, is that we're going to be able to adjust the programs, the processes, and protocols whenever it's necessary to ensure that the best teaching and learning conditions are in the school buildings, and those conditions are also best for our employees. Next. So I think some of the questions that we had earlier received was, well, how did we develop this plan? We solicited participation from various constituent groups, including the teachers, support staff, parents, administrators, community members, Department of Health representatives, and other community people. So we did get 58 individuals that came forward and were willing to participate on a regular basis to help us put this plan together. We did subdivide it into 6 subcommittees. Those subcommittees are listed right here: teaching and learning, social and emotional wellness, fiscal, food and transportation, special programs, health and safety, and communications. Each one of these subcommittees was facilitated by a chairperson or co-chairperson on a regular basis. Notes were taken. Individuals were able to voice their concerns, voice their opinions, collaborate with one another. And on a weekly basis, those individual co-chairs or facilitators came together on mostly Thursdays, some of it lasted all day, to then report back to the group. The group of facilitators then discussed the commonalities of what was being said, what was being discussed. And it was that basis of gathering all of this information that led us to put together the 18-page proposal that was posted online on our website and on Facebook. Next. So we were under a very significant timeline crunch for developing this plan. We did not receive guidance until July 16th from State Ed Department. That guidance eventually ended up being about a 150-page document. If you included all of the references that were in there, it was over a 400-page document. And that can be found on the New York State Education website. We basically had to decipher that information, cull it down to several manageable portions, and then discuss those portions in the subcommittees. So it really was only less than a month ago that we were able to do that after the release of the guidance. We did manage to put a summary document together first for parents and staff, and that was communicated via Facebook, website, and email. The complete plan was put together and had to be posted online and uploaded to the state website and the Department of Health by July 30th or 31st. And we were able to do that, and we were successful in getting that done. You may have heard that some school districts were on a list. I think there were 107 school districts that either didn't put the plan in properly or didn't notify Department of Health of their plan. And those corrections are being made as we speak. And most of those 107 school districts, I think, are now in the approval process. We did send out a survey a little over a week ago on August 4th. That survey was very important, and we thank everybody who participated in that survey and sending back the information from that survey. The next few slides will basically pull out some of the most important information that was culled from the survey, and that information really guided our final decisions on what needs to be done as we reopen the school. Next slide. So we had 485 responses. These are responses by parents responding to their individual students, their children. So one parent, if they had 3 individual students in school, maybe 2 at the elementary and maybe 1 at the middle school, high school, they would send in 3 responses. We have about 661 students enrolled in K-12 programs at the elementary school and at the middle school, high school. So we got a pretty good response rate considering the number of students we have. And when we looked at that, this is again, all changing and dynamic. It may change because we're still getting some responses in from parents. And if you haven't responded, and somebody maybe later on can correct me if I'm wrong, but the survey is still open. And I think we're still taking those responses as late as today. Interestingly, about 2/3 of the parents intended or do intend to send their students back to school for for live learning. They'll be in school. About 30% decided to have remote instruction only. And we will get into the specifics of that later on. But it is interesting, about 2/3 will come back to school to sit in desks to learn from the teachers in the classrooms. So we had to really decide how can we accommodate those students. And to be quite honest, we are a very fortunate and lucky school system to have small class sizes. And this really was a determining factor pretty much on how we can open school. We can accommodate just about every class within our 2 buildings. And there'll be still a slight change at the middle school, high school, where we divided them in half, and that'll be explained later on by the building principal. So let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about transportation. This, I think, was a surprising number. About half will allow their child to ride the school bus. The other half will be providing transportation on their own. So we have about 50% of students that will go on the buses. So we had to look at capacity, and it just so happens that the guidance that was provided by the Department of Health, by the CDC, by State Ed Department, also kind of coincided and corresponded to half of the ridership in the bus. So we'll talk a little bit about that later on. I know it's in our plan that there will be one student per seat wearing a mask. That is basically what we have planned at this point. And of course, it can change, it can go up, it can go down, depending on how many more responses we get. Next slide. For remote learning, we really needed to know what % of those students or households have internet access, Wi-Fi, landline using a cell phone, or basically being able to connect to the outside world. And we did find that almost 80% will be able to participate based on the parents telling us that they can fully participate when other members are actually using the internet at the same time. That's actually a pretty good % where we can have simultaneous students from home learning uh, in their homes. About 18%, however, can only have partial internet access and can't fully participate simultaneously with a brother or sister, but can if the families limit the time and the use of the internet and of the computers or the Chromebooks that we will be providing. So that kind of is the basis for the remainder of the presentation, which will now go down to the individual school level and transportation, et cetera. So the on-campus instruction, we're going to have 2 presentations following the same slide format. I believe the first one will be Principal Tracy Kent, followed by Principal Jody Sullivan. So I'm going to go to the next slide, and I think, Tracy, if you're on, you can now take over.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. At the elementary school, we are going to be offering 2 models of instruction. The first is our in-person model. Students will attend school Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, 4 days a week. And Wednesdays will be an all remote learning day. And that holds true for all students, regardless of their learning choice. The other option for our students and families is a remote only option. So in this option, students would not physically be attending the school building, but would receive their instruction at home through the use of technology. Regardless of your learning choice, all students will receive instruction in art, music, library, technology, and physical education. We are still planning to have a 30-minute recess time daily for students. I think that it's very important for them to be able to get outside, get some fresh air, move around, because they will be spending the majority of their day in the same classroom. Breakfast and lunch, we are working with food service to have that delivered to classrooms so that students would be eating both breakfast and lunch in the classroom. The thinking behind this is based on the guidance, and we want to minimize transitions for our students. Typically, if you think about the large number of students who would be eating in the cafeteria, we just didn't feel that was the best environment or safest environment for our students. For those who are opting for the remote only, that instruction may be delivered by several teachers, including, of course, our own, and we are exploring options to collaborate with teachers from Questar and other local school districts. Next slide. So I wanted to be able to show you some of the classrooms at BES and the steps that we've been taking. So the picture on the left is a classroom that has desks. We've removed as much furniture as possible to allow for the spacing between desks. The middle photo is a classroom, kindergarten classroom. The majority of our classrooms have tables. So in order to be able to ensure social distancing and safety for our students, we'll be using the individual student dividers that you see on the right-hand side of the screen. So students who are sitting at a table will each have their own divider to help maintain that separation. When students are seated behind their barrier, they can remove their mask so that they're not having to wear their mask for very prolonged periods of time. We understand that is challenging for our younger students, and we're looking at instruction and how we can accommodate their needs allowing for mask breaks throughout the day. Next. At this time, our middle school, high school principal, Jody Sullivan, will discuss the learning models in her building.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. For those of you who I've met already, very great to meet you. And for those of you who I have not had a chance to meet yet, welcome and thank you. Very much looking forward to working with your students very soon. Let me just explain to you in the middle high school building, because the state guidance for, the best scenario for students in grades kindergarten through sixth grade was for them to attend more. They will have the option of the 4-day in-person instruction, or families can choose the remote only instruction. The in-person instruction for sixth grade will be very similar to the K-5 model in terms of which days they'll come into the building. So those students will attend in person Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Wednesdays are all remote for all students. If your family chooses remote only instruction, all of the instruction will be delivered all days remotely. We intend to, again, utilize technology through mainly in the middle high school Chromebooks, and to have those devices available for your children so that they can join in on remote instruction, which will be defined later on as synchronous or asynchronous. And we'll take questions about that later if you have that in the question and answer form. Students in sixth grade will also have a 30-minute lunch. The breakfast and lunches will still be eaten in classrooms. Depending on your child's course or schedule, we are looking to minimize transitions, but students may transition to different classrooms at times. For example, there are certain science equipment, calculators at the higher level math classes, materials necessary for certain art projects, etc., or for outdoor PE. There are a number of classrooms that students will need to move to so that they can be in the best environment for learning that content. And remote only instruction, again, may be delivered by Berlin teachers, collaborating teachers from Questar 3 or other local school districts. The Berlin Middle High School learning models for grades 7 through 12 is really our most complex hybrid model. If you have chosen in-school, in-person instruction, we are really looking to get those answers from families so that we can begin to split cohorts in half. For example, we will look down the list of everyone who has chosen in-person instruction, and we'll separate them so that we have 2 equal groups at every grade level. As soon as we're able to do that, we'll let your family know and your students know whether they're in the green cohort or the gold cohort. The green cohort students will receive their in-person instruction on Mondays and Thursdays, and then will be remotely learning on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. If your child is in the gold cohort, they'll be in person on Tuesdays and Fridays and remote on the opposite 3. Teachers right now are going through some different professional development on hybrid models and how to do in-person and remote instruction utilizing best practices that we discussed in the teaching and learning subcommittee of the COVID task force. These students will also have a 30-minute lunch. Breakfast and lunch will be eaten in classrooms. And again, depending on the type of course or the type of materials needed for the course or other logistics within the school building, there may be times when students will be transitioning to different classrooms. There may be times when teachers will be transitioning to different classrooms to teach a group of students that way. In this same model, we will be doing our very best to provide remote instruction by Berlin teachers, but may need to collaborate again with other teachers from Questar or other school districts. I wanted to point out, Fred, could you just go back for 1 second? Thank you. I wanted to point out for those classes that do rotate on a day 1 or a day 2 schedule, the Monday will be a day 1 schedule, a Thursday will be a day 2 schedule for the green group, and a Tuesday will be a day 2 schedule, and a Friday would be a day 1 schedule for those in-person students. So regardless of whether your child is in person or remote, Monday will be day 1, Tuesday will be day 2. Wednesday will not be assigned a day. Thursday will be day 2, and Friday will be day 1. This type of rotation is important to provide equitability for those classes that do only meet on an every other day basis. Some of the most popular ones are band and chorus, PE, and labs that we need to consider. Again, we just have a couple of examples of classrooms. Starting on the far left is a more just traditional classroom where our desks are marked at least 6 feet distance from one another. We intend to have students, once they're seated at the 6-foot distance and able to remain seated at their desk, we intend to be able to allow students to remove their masks at that point. If they are not, or you prefer that they don't, they're certainly welcome to keep them on. We also have in the middle an example of, this is a 6-foot at least distance computers and technology. This is in one of our Spanish classrooms. On the bottom in the center, you can sort of see some of the sanitizing materials. Those are examples of some things that we have been using on a regular basis to disinfect. And all the way to the right is an example of small group instruction. This is a small reading classroom, but even still, that classroom typically only has about 5 students. And so as you see in the picture here, we're still able to accommodate the number of students in those rooms. We've been really very pleasantly surprised and very lucky at how these classrooms look nice and neat and cleaned and spread out like that. So before we do get to Cyril and his crew, I do want to make sure that we thank them for getting those mocked up for us so that we can get a visual of what those rooms will look like. Thank you, Fred.
I can't progress the slide. There we go. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for bearing with us. There's a whole lot to cover. So to get into some of the instructional details, Wednesdays has been left as a remote learning day for all students. We did see some questions come through the survey regarding that. There are some really good reasons as to why we're leaving those Wednesdays open. So this is a different type of teaching for our folks, and we are going to need to provide substantial professional development for staff over time. We want to be prepared for any changes and any variations in the instructional day would create a need for development for teaching model or teaching strategy. We also want to be able to allow for flexibility in our systemic planning. God forbid that that the numbers go up and we need to go remote like we did in the spring. We want to make sure that we do that as best as possible, which means that we have to continually plan for all the options. We have to monitor the data, and we have to communicate within our system to make sure that we're providing what we need. We have to monitor that provision and make sure that we're doing everything we can for your kids. And then also, it's a good day for providing additional cleaning. Our teachers on those Wednesdays will be providing remote variations of remote instruction. Some may be conferencing, some might be learning experiences that are assigned without technology being incorporated. Some may choose to have virtual classrooms. We're kind of working with individual teachers. All the courses are different. There's many different grade levels and many different styles and needs. So we're trying to stay flexible with all of that. Flexibility is going to be a key to our success. All the teachers of grade 4 through 12 will use Schoology learning management system to communicate with students and families, to record grades and assignments, to collaborate with colleagues, and to provide access to online instruction and resources. We did hear you. There was everybody was very collaborative, very wonderful in the spring, but myriad of learning platforms became confusing. So we are streamlining all of that. All teachers grade K through 3 will use a platform designed more for elementary learning. That platform is called Seesaw, and that's going to be their learning management system, whether they are remote or on campus. We are looking to determine which video conferencing component we're going to use, but everyone in the district will use the same one so that it is not confusing. There won't be some Google Meets and some big blue button and some Zoom. There will be one platform that we should have decided on a little later this week. And Ms. Brewer?
Hi, good evening, everybody. Just to touch quickly on special education services and other special programs in the district. At the elementary level, our students with disabilities will attend, 4 days a week, just like all of their peers. At the secondary level, we did make the decision for all of our students with disabilities, so all students who have an IEP or an individualized education plan, to attend 4 days. Special education services will be provided to the greatest extent possible. However, there may be some differences in what that looks like. So for example, the location, group sizes, things like that, the guidance has allowed us continued flexibility in that area. So related services, for example, are being advised at this time to push into classrooms as much as possible. This is going to help us reduce transitions and to keep students within their cohorts as much as possible. There will absolutely be exceptions, but this is what we're encouraging our service providers to do. In terms of RTI at the elementary school, we will continue to provide RTI, or response to intervention. Again, it may look a little bit different, just like everything going into the fall is going to look a little bit different. It'll be provided in a combination of both push-in and pull-out services, again, to try to reduce those transitions and keep students within their cohorts as much as possible. AIS, Academic Intervention Services, at the high school has typically been provided to students who did fail Regents exams. Because Regents exams in June and August were canceled, we are still going to be providing AIS services to students based on data analysis and record review. And then the guidance does allow for special considerations for, and this is the language that was used in the guidance, high needs or at-risk students. So we are making some accommodations for other students who may have specific needs, who may not necessarily have an IEP or an individualized education plan, but may have some other needs. And we are looking to schedule some of those students at the secondary level to come in 4 days a week as well, so they continue to get the educational supports that they need to be successful.
Okay, so for remote instruction, to help simplify some of the conversations, we are distinguishing between remote learning and the remote learning program. So for example, all students on Wednesdays will be learning remotely. That's the remote learning. However, if a parent opts to have their student participate in the remote learning program, then that student is not going to come to campus at any time. And that may be a considerably different in design than the on-campus or hybrid models are. But if you are opting into fully remote instruction, please complete the request form that is going to be posted on the website tomorrow morning. And please provide it by August 21st. For families, especially with students in grades 7 through 12, you may get a call before August 21st to help us speed our scheduling and communications process. We need this data to complete the scheduling. We need this data to complete the transportation elements. So I know there's a lot we're asking, a lot that's being asked of us, but we do need to have this data relatively soon. So remote learning will be substantively similar to the on-campus learning program, though there will be considerable differences in the delivery model. The objective is to provide students with resources and instruction to master the course content. They will be seeing the same standards remotely and on campus, though the level at which they see them, the interaction with teachers, that may change with the differences in the delivery model. The expectations, and this is something else that we heard from the spring, for K-5 students is that your kids will be working for about 1 to 2 hours daily online. Expectations for 6-12 should not be any more than 4 hours daily. The data we're compiling from students and teachers will help us be prepared as possible to determine the format and schedule of remote instruction. And again, if you have not done so, please either complete the district survey or if you are choosing remote instruction, also the remote learning request form. This data is important so we can understand our needs, plan based on your requests, and communicate back to you as fast as possible. Remote only instruction may be delivered by Berlin teachers. It may be delivered from teachers at Questar 3, or it may be some combination of collaborating teachers based on those previous statements. The reason is we don't know how many students are going to be remote until we have that information, so we can't answer that question necessarily at this time. Teachers will be providing remote instruction via synchronous learning, asynchronous learning, or individualized learning. So synchronous learning is that students log in to join an in-person classroom according to their scheduled times. English is at 8 o'clock, so you log in at 8 o'clock. Asynchronous learning will be for students who can't log in at 8 o'clock. To meet that, students will log in to view a pre-recorded lesson using that learning management platform. Again, the design of that lesson, obviously being synchronous with your class, is going to allow students to access that learning in the same capacity. They'll be able to hear other questions. They'll be able to ask questions directly as opposed to having to submit them through Schoology or an email. And individualized learning is for teachers and students who will need to connect using other methods at times that are scheduled around the teacher's regularly scheduled teaching schedule. That's a lot of schedules in there. But basically what that means is that if a student is not able to attend the synchronous and cannot access the asynchronous, then we're going to have to develop something that's individualized for that student. To try and ensure the highest quality of teaching, we're allowing teachers to work with their individual students who are engaging via remote learning program to determine the best options for their learning. Not all teachers, not all students, and not all courses work under the same dynamic. And again, flexibility is critical to ensuring our effectiveness. Dr. Young, I think this is you.
Okay, let me briefly go through the food service program and what we envision happening when we get back into school in September. We are going to provide breakfast and lunch in a way that ensures appropriate social distancing, and we are going to be doing that by allowing the eating of the food in the classrooms. So the students will be socially distanced. They'll be 6 feet apart for the most part at the middle school, high school. They may be eating at their tables with their shields in front of them at the elementary schools. The students will be provided with the meals each day, whether they're in attendance at school or learning remotely. The process for food stations delivery is being developed. It is anticipated that we will have pickup points within the school district, probably at both buildings. We are not at this point able to deliver food remotely with our buses at this time, but we are looking into other possibilities. The accommodations, if your child has a severe food allergy, we know about it already. It will obviously be continued in a way that that child will not become in contact with a peanut allergy or a fruit allergy. So that will continue in its present format. The students will be supervised during mealtime, and we do enforce the non-sharing of food and beverages unless those children are in the same household. This includes celebrations such as birthdays and holidays. Next. For transportation, this has been a very big question among parents on how are we going to get the students to the schools. Because we anticipate 50% ridership, I think it's a little bit easier to put those students on the same bus routes that they've been on previously. The families will need to take temperatures of their children before they go out to the bus stop. We will be sending you a link to an application that you could use on your cell phone or on the computer or on the Chromebook, so that you will take the child's temperature, and it will then determine whether or not that child will be able to go and ride the bus. The bus drivers will have a listing of students that do not have the COVID-19 symptoms or that do not have a fever. So we will have those lists available before the bus drivers start their runs in the morning. That's going to be an important part of the parents taking those temperatures, as was recommended by the Department of Health and the CDC. Students and staff will wear a face covering on the buses at all times. The only exception to that is if the child cannot wear a face mask medically for whatever reason. We will need to know that. The doctor will have to provide some sort of note indicating the child is not allowed to wear a mask because of a medical condition. That child will then be seated at least 6 feet away from every other child on the bus. If your child requires an attendant or bus driver to strap them in or in any way facilitate them getting into their seat, that staff member will be required to wear gloves. The students who do not have a mask when boarding will be provided one for that particular day. So we will have bus masks available for those students who forgot it or who may need one for that day. The students will be assigned one per seat, unless, of course, I mentioned earlier, they reside in the same household, then they can have 2 or maybe even 3 if they're really small in one seat. If the student resides in the same household, they will be assigned to share that seat with other members. So first and a third grader will probably be sitting in the same seat, if they're from the same family. We could accommodate at this point the students basically on the regular bus runs. They may look different. There may be more individuals on a bus, or there may be fewer individuals on a bus, all depending on the number of students who have total remote instruction. Next. Okay, the format for the students will be a little different than years previously. Students will be allowed only 1 a.m. route and 1 p.m. route for each student riding the school bus. We cannot accommodate or make alternate arrangements. No bus notes this year. You're either going to go to your house in the morning, or if your parent chooses, the student can be dropped off at another location in the afternoon. but we can't make accommodations going back and forth because of the number of students on those buses. The arrival and dismissal will be managed so as to permit appropriate social distancing. So students, when they come off the bus, will be required to wait 6 feet before departing, and then they will be going into a school or lining up 6 feet apart. The parents are encouraged to drive their students to and from school, if feasible, in order to reduce that density on the buses. So if the parents do opt to drive students to and from school, they will need to submit the health screening via the EduForm app as well. So there is going to be a form that everybody needs to fill out daily, and it will be pretty much self-explanatory, and basically 4 or 5 questions, similar to what every staff employee coming into the building will be required to fill out. I think that's it for transportation. Health and safety and facilities.
Okay, so good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this informative session. So, as Dr. Young alluded to earlier in the presentation, all staff and students will wear a face covering, which will have to cover their nose, mouth, and chin, except when engaged in instruction, eating, or seated at a desk or table that's been placed an appropriate distance from their peers and staff. Again, those students attending the elementary school where they're seated at the tables versus student desks will be providing student dividers for those students to maintain their protection. Face covering breaks will be built into their daily schedule, as the principals alluded to. Again, once the students are in and seated either behind their dividers or seated at their desk for instruction, they'll be allowed to take off their masks if that is their desire or your desire. So families are responsible for taking their child's temperature each morning before going to school. And again, that will need to be done, and the app information will need to be completed if your child is planning on riding a school bus each day. Anyone with a temperature greater than 100.0 degrees Fahrenheit will need to stay home from school as per the Department of Health guidance. And again, if you need further information, you can refer to the health and safety protocols established following that guidance. Students will be trained on proper practices of hand hygiene, respiratory hygiene, and can you advance the screen, Fred? Okay. Again, that instruction will occur on the initial days when school begins for in-person instruction. And again, those students who are going to be remote learners, that instruction will also be provided. The employees of the district will also be screened each day to determine their temperatures and their health status. All persons will maintain a 6 foot of social distancing while in school and on school grounds whenever appropriate. Again, not only will that be required in the classrooms at the middle school, high school, but it will also include common areas such as the entrances, exits, lobbies, hallways, etc., of not only the middle school, high school, but also at the elementary school. All persons will adhere to all directional signage and other COVID-19 related materials displayed throughout the schools. It's our intention to provide posters for informational purposes and also directional signage that will be applied on floors and corridors and hallways. Visitors will be limited to only those individuals requiring access for school business. Again, it's important in order to maintain a safe environment for the students and staff that we restrict other visitors to the building. Prior approval from the building administrator will be required. So if your intent is to visit the building, you'll need to make sure that you contact the offices at either the elementary school or middle school, high school, and make that appointment. The district will continue to follow the CDC and Department of Health guidelines when cleaning and disinfecting all school facilities and buses. Thank you.
So this concludes our presentation of the reopening of school for September. If you do have any questions, we had to set up a specific email address to answer those questions, and that is schoolreopening@berlincentral.org. Use that, send it there, and one of us will be able to respond to that question. For more information, you can also go online at the address located below, and there will be an entire several web pages devoted to the COVID-19 guidelines, protocols, procedures, many different resources that are available for parents and for students. And we will be updating the question and answer document as we put together the questions that you've asked today. That will be available probably on Monday. So check back, go to the question and answer document if you haven't had your question answered live today. So I think we have a lot of work ahead of us as a community, as a group of individuals and families that are very concerned with both the learning and teaching in Berlin, as well as the health and safety in Berlin. We have a very good plan in place. Things are likely to change if we get further instructions or guidelines or regulations. We will certainly have to change what we've discussed today on the fly. But we do hope that you have a better understanding of what school will look like. Again, thank you for participating, and we welcome again you back to school in September. We welcome the students back to school in September, and we are doing what we can to provide the best opportunity to get our children, your children, our students back into the learning mode as quickly and as safely as possible. Thank you very much, and if you need to see this again, it will be available on Monday. Thank you very much.